Hey folks, and welcome. Season 2 is very nearly upon us, so welcome to the dungeon guides. Starting off is Vortex Pinnacle, so let's get into it. So, starting off with the first pack that you're going to see in Vortex Pinnacle, you're going to see 5 mobs. The 2 wild vortexes are the ones that you need to worry about with kicks. The Gust Soldiers and the Armored Minstrels don't do anything particular, aside from melee attack the tank, and the Gust Soldiers, when they die, will detonate. So you can see here that the wild vortex is just cast. A simple kick will get them grouped up, and then the rest of this group is easy to deal with. The Armored Minstrels do a Storm Surge, which is an AoE damaging ability. This is kind of either going to be a get out of it while you're gearing and getting used to the dungeon, or if your healer is geared and competent, you can obviously just heal through the damage. When this was a current dungeon, 9 times out of 10 you used to just heal through it. So the Armored Minstrels here, you've got 2 on the bridge. Nothing too drastic to worry about. Again, they just bap your tank, and then you just kill them off, bewaring of the AoE abilities that they do. So you've got Storm Surge here, which is just, as you can see better without anything else in the way, it's just a pulsing AoE. So we take that out, we move forward. Now, that Lurking Tempest, these are interesting mobs. Essentially, you're not ever really going to be able to kill these unless you were to run Vortex Pinnacle, the Cataclysm edition, like I did. Now, what these do is when you pull them, as I'm about to do in a second with the Curse of Tongues when I realise, oh, I don't have aggro with it, I'm too high a level. If you're not facing it, it will do a cast. You can see there, Lightning Bolt. And these casts hurt, and it'll just continue doing so until you end up turning around and visibly looking at them. When it realizes that it's been detected, then it will dissipate. It will essentially feign death. Now, these packs here are comprised of Gust Soldiers and 3 Wild Vortexes. Now, I'm about to do something here that I think might be a Mythic Plus strat, potentially, in that you can double up these casters, because as you can see, those Wild Vortexes will end up coming to you if you stand in that corner. Now, if you end up having one person deal with it, you can still make sure that the Lurking Tempest is no longer a threat by just looking at it in this. So you can see where I'm positioned. You will end up having the Lurking Tempest just inactive and healing through it all, but it does mean that you'll end up with the ability to AoE all those casters, Shadow Furies, things like that. Now, because we're about to do a second pack down this spiral, as you can see, another Gust Soldier, 3 Wild Vortexes, Lurking Tempest, and we've also got 2 Cloud Soldiers and Cloud Prince. Now, the Cloud Prince just summons more Vortexes, or so that you end up with yet more things to AoE. But you can see here, you can utilize this pillar, again, to kite casters. You can see there, I'm just trying to utilize gateway options for the Warlock specific tips that I'll be releasing during the season as well. So you can kind of see what I'm doing there. But again, by using this pillar, you can again group them up. This is going to help with the AoE side of things. And depending on how difficult this is tuned, we may see this done pretty much from the offset, or it may take a little bit of gearing before we're able to pull these kind of things off. So again, relatively easy, a little bit of looting for the volatile airs. But you've got the Lurking Tempest on this side. Again, just look at it until everyone's passed. Then it doesn't pose a threat. We then cross the bridge and we end up with 1 Lurking Tempest and 2 Cloud Princes. This pack, there's nothing really special about it. What we're going to end up doing is taking out the Cloud Princes. They summon the Whipping Winds, and the Whipping Winds are just baby vortexes, essentially. They like cast Lightning Bolts. You want to stack them up, silence them, stun them, AoE, they go down. And this brings us to the first boss, Grand Vizier Ertan. Now, Ertan does a few things. As you can see through these tornadoes that are circling around the room, they exist, and they're essentially going to come into the center and go back out at regular intervals. Lightning Bolt is just the tank buster. You can't interrupt it, you can't do anything about it. So tanks, just make sure you use your mitigation. Now, intermittently throughout this fight, he will summon Lurking Tempests. Remember, you just have to look at them to deactivate. Now, a tuning change that has happened on the PTR is when these tornadoes go in, this particular segment is going to be a massive healing phase. So personal cooldowns will be required, and you'll need to discuss and utilize how you're going to do it. But outside of that, it's basically just a boss rush, because what you want to do is you want to kill Grand Vizier before he can summon enough Lurking Tempests that you can no longer look at all the targets. Because obviously the moment you can't look at them all is the moment you start having problems and they start casting a lot. And the healers will really fall behind then. So, bit of a boss race. It'll be interesting to see how it's finally tuned, especially when we get around to things like Tyrannical Weeks. Now, little novelty of the dungeon, you have the slipstreams, which will bounce you around from pillar to post. And it brings us on to the Turbulent Squalls. These are an AoE pack. You're going to end up pulling one side of them. I doubt you'll ever pull both. Now, these don't really do much of an ability. You'll have to forgive the logging there. But the AoE ability here is Thunder Squall. Essentially, it does AoE damage to everyone. And again, these are kind of a quick rush, kill them kind of thing. But aside from that, they just hit the boss. They'll die relatively quickly, especially when the group goes ham on them. Now, moving on to the Empyrean Assassins. They do have a toxin that acts as a snare. You'll see I just enable it there to stop it popping up. That acts as kind of like crippling poison, but they also have an ability called Blur, or they essentially go incorporeal, which means that they're immune to CC, they can't be hit, that kind of stuff. Just stop the cast. Whether you stun it before they go incorporeal, or just wait it out, like if you're kiting. It depends on how you want to process this, because there are another 2 packs where you deal with the assassins. My recommendation is just Shadow Fury, Sweep, Nova, any of your AoE stuns that you've got, and if push comes to shove, you've then got things like Dragon's Breath and things, and other forms of CC like that. Now, this young Storm Dragon, this green well that I'm in, is a healing well. What you're about to see is me play a little bit of hokey cokey with this dragon, because this dragon doesn't really do a lot. It does Chilling Blast, which is a frontal AoE, so tanks don't kite it into groups. But in higher difficulties, what you can do is there is a sweet spot where you can benefit from the healing well. I believe I just have to move back slightly. And there we go. We have the healing well, and the dragon doesn't. This means that these healing wells are going to be really beneficial for your healers. So you may actually see like that dual pack of assassins that were over here. You may see them being pulled into that just on the outskirts of the healing well, or you're about to see it used in the next pull. Now, these Howling Gales, they just do a bit of a knockback and pushback. Just damage them, destroy them, and run across the bridge. It's not going to be too difficult. Now, this particular 4 assassins and young dragon, if your tank is competent, or confident rather, to be able to handle the positioning, to be able to deal with the healing circle, then you'll be able to. Now, there I Shadow Furied. Wasn't needed in this dungeon, but it kind of gives you an idea of how you manage those assassins. And again, Storm Dragon does the exact same thing. Now, this is a pack of 4 Squall, 2 assassins. Again, this is probably going to be one of those you want Shadow Furies. Now, you can see that I'm going to try and utilize the healing well here from a positional perspective, but because the Squalls and the assassins are melee based and they follow you, you don't have that same grace period within your hitbox. So, like, the Squalls are just in it, and there's nothing you can do about it, because they'll just follow you around. So, if you are going to utilize it, it will be during dragon fights. Which, on the topic of Dragonflight, brings us to the next boss, Altreus. Altreus? Alterus. However you pronounce it. This Dragon Boy is gonna be a little bit of a pain in the ass for people to get used to, but should be fun once you have gotten used to it. So, there's a few mechanics that you really need to worry about for. You've got these tornadoes. You then have Call of the Wind, or Call the Wind, and then you have Chilling Breath. Now, Chilling Breath is just something that the tank needs to be wary of. You then have these winds. If your back is to the wind, and you are essentially upwind of your target, you will get a haste and movement buff. If you are downwind of your target, then you will get a debuff, which fairly straightforward. As you can see here, you go from red to green, you're upwind, you now have a casting speed increase and a movement speed increase. Now, one of the changes to the dungeon from its Cataclysm incarnation is these tornadoes that you can see me hopping into to get thrown into the air is actually going to be part of the fight. And that's because there's going to be an ability that comes sweeping across the ground, and you will need to be launched into the air to jump over it. Some classes like Demon Hunters and potentially Evokers might be able to just double jump it, but I'm not 100% sure as of yet, so just use the tornadoes. Especially as a Warlock, use the tornadoes. You could potentially make use of Circle, but that's by the by. Now, this is where we start getting onto what is going to be rather problematic. Now, the Adepts themselves actually have two casts that need kicking. You have the Holy Smite, and you also have Greater Heal. Now, you're not going to see Greater Heal in this dungeon because obviously everything I do one-shots. However, Greater Heal from the Adepts is the priority kick. Do not let that thing get off. Because if you do, it will pretty much heal these Ministers of Air or the Servant of Assads straight to full health. It is not fun, and it takes a lot of time, so you need to make sure that you've got the Temple Adept at least on lockdown. Next, you have the Minister of Air that you can see is just doing Lightning Lash, and if the target that it's planning to hit with Lightning Lash is too close, it will also knock you back. Minor inconvenience, but again, if you have the spare kick, then do kick it, group it up, but deal with the Temple Adept first. Now, you can see I'm just swapping a couple of bits of gear because I accidentally one-shot things with my procs. Whether it be Rage Feather or my Inquisitor's Eye. Now, going up these ramps, because they are quite long ramps, you do have these mini tornadoes that are a speed increase if you can stay in front of them. But that is a minor thing. Now, these electric fields are going to play a part in the final boss, and this is where you're being introduced to them. While in the electric field, spells are redirected. Essentially, it's a grounding totem. What this means is certain kicks cannot be used either to get things out. So you're going to see I'm going to do Fell Hunter Kick in a minute on that Minister of Air, Lightning Lash. I go to kick it. Kick is now on cooldown, and I still didn't kick it. So this means that if you're unfortunate in your timing, you're going to have to range the casts out of that circle, or triangle, sorry, in order to get to a position where you can kick them. You can see there that that Minister of Air for Lightning Lash knocked me back, which is what I was saying. So just be careful you're not kiting them like on the side of these rooms. Now, there is a slight difference here in opinion. Now, these Skyfall stars can all be AoE'd, but you can actually avoid them by taking this right path and just going behind this right pillar. So, depending on how much damage these things do and how scary they are, especially on fortified weeks, you might just see a skip here. But, again, that kind of depends on percentage and where you can accumulate the other parts, like whether or not the squalls that we didn't take after the first boss are easier to pick up than these Skyfall stars. Because, as you can see there, they don't stay together, and they just pump out damage. For anyone that remembers or played in the Cataclysm era, you know that those things hurt and were quite scary. Healers didn't like them at all. Again, you can line of sight here. Temple Adepts, just pull them up. You have two in this pack, so for Warlocks, Amplify Curse and Curse of Tongues is going to be your best friend for one of them. And do remember that as one gets low, the other might cast Greater Heal on them, and they can feed into each other. So, Temple Adepts are always your priority target. Get them killed, get them silenced, get them locked down. Minister of Air, Servant of Assads, and the Executioner of Caliph. The Executioner is going to scare your tank potentially, depending on the type of tank they are, because it does do quite a lot of damage, or it will do a lot of damage. But again, nothing we haven't already seen. We're quite fortunate in the Vortex Pinnacle as our first dungeon guide is a very straightforward dungeon, and there's not too much to worry about. Now, again, you have these tornadoes to run you all the way down, but If your healer's comfortable with it before pulling the next pack, you can all just drop down to save yourself a little bit of time at the cost of health. So, deal with the Skyfall Stars, and that's about it, really. It brings us to the final boss. Vortex Pinnacle is a very generous dungeon. So it'll be interesting to see what the timer looks like for this dungeon as well. Now, moving on to the last boss, we're going to see a culmination of the previous things that we've seen since the second boss. So you're going to see the summoning of a single Skyfall Star to start with. Obviously, this ad just needs murdering. And then you're going to go into Chain Lightning and Unstable Grounding Field. So Chain Lightning there, that's just a spread out mechanic, as one might expect. And then you have the Unstable Grounding Field. Now, the reason this is being cast on the floor is because you're going to have to get into it. Because if you don't, as Assad is doing the Supremacy of the Storm, if you were to stand out of here like this, you would die very, very quickly. Treat it like you would Herja's mechanic when you all have to get in the bubble. It's the exact same premise. So, for those of you that have played Halls of Valor this season, Assad is very, very similar. The only difference is, rather than yeeting your tank across the room, it'll be yeeting your DPS across the room as these Skyfall Stars get summoned. You can see there the 2 were summoned, and if this fight got progressively longer, more and more would be summoned. Again, this is more of a boss rush dungeon, so bringing some good single target to deal with these bosses is going to be beneficial. You can see here that I'm trying to take off my Soul Leech to try and demonstrate how much damage it does. Unfortunately, I just have way too much health. But, point was, it's a very dangerous dungeon. And it will be when tuning occurs. So, hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. And I will see you all in the next one. Take care, folks, and have a good one.